Hello, everyone, and welcome to Twitch Solves the Rubik's Cube. For the next hour, you guys in chat will have control over a virtual cube through the Twitch chat. Your goal is to solve the cube collectively. In these difficult times, this is just another way we can all get together and connect while being socially distant. Today with us, we've got Bob Burton. Hello, Bob.
How you doing?
Bob is the World Cube Association Executive Director, a member of the WCA board, and has been an active member in the cubing community for nearly 20 years. He's also well known for his role in Cubing USA, being an organizer for large recognizable competitions such as Worlds 2013 in Las Vegas, Nevada. We've brought Bob on to talk about the organizations he is and has been a part of, and to get a special look inside the WCA. We're excited to have you on, Bob, and welcome again.
Thanks for having me.
So for you guys down in chat, this is going to be something that you guys should be pretty familiar with at this point. There's going to be a 20-second voting period where you guys can vote for different moves. And whichever move gets the majority vote is going to be applied to the cube. The notation is pretty standard. RUL, FD, MES are the moves you're allowed to do. And you can do primes for an anti-clockwise turn and a 2, so R2, for example, for a double turn. And of course, you can rotate using the X, Y, and Z rotations. After those 20 seconds, the move with the most votes is going to be applied, and there's going to be a cooldown period to make sure that some spillover votes near the end of the voting period don't get applied prematurely. We'd like to thank Rubik's for supporting us with Twitch Solves Rubik's Cube, and of course, we'd also like to thank Lucas Guerin for helping us with the software side of things. And without further ado, we're going to get this event started. So let's start with Twitch Solves the Rubik's Cube, and then let's start talking, Bob. So how you been? How's life for you?
It's been busy, but hectic having the two kids at home in quarantine, but we're making it work.
So you're also a teacher by day and WCA executive director by nights and weekends. How's teaching going in times like this? Are you using a lot of, I'm assuming you're on summer vacation now, but.
It's great in July and August. It was okay in the other months too. We were remote since March. I was originally using Zoom for teaching. Mm-hmm. Then Zoom got banned by the Department of Education, and so I switched over to Microsoft Teams. Everybody else switched over to Google Meet.
And that worked okay for your kids?
It worked okay. It definitely was a lot harder to learn virtually than in person. I didn't get too many complaints.
Well, we're thankful for all that you do as a teacher, especially in New York City, one of the crazier places in this world. But we've also brought you on because of your massive expertise and history within the WCA and other organizations. You have a 2003 WCA ID, so you went to the very first Rubik's Cube World Championship nowadays.
The first one in my lifetime, at least.
Okay, yeah, fair. And you're still active. It's been 17 years since that point. What made you stick around all this time?
It's a lot of fun. You've been to competitions. They're really a joy. It's a lot of fun to go to the competitions, and I like helping the WCA. Lately, I do a lot more helping than actually solving.
So you started working with the WCA when?
2005. So I went to the first competition in 2003. Uh-huh. I didn't do anything in 2004. I was going to go to U.S. Nationals in 2004, but I was abroad. So I didn't get to go to a competition until January 2005. So I went to a few there. I went to the one in California at the Exploratorium, went to another one in Schaumburg, Illinois. And then it wasn't until I think May that year that I was able to go to one I didn't have to fly to. And then later that year, I organized the competition at Rutgers, the Rutgers Fall 2005, and then started delegating shortly after that.
So 2005 was when you started as a delegate. You've held a couple of other hats within the community as well. You're now an executive director of the board, but you were a senior delegate for the U.S. at that point, or before that point as well, right?
Yeah, when we started the senior delegates in 2013, I was the original senior delegate for the Eastern United States and Canada. But at that point, Canada was just Toronto. And then I held that until I joined the board in 2017. And I've also been a member of the marketing team since we incepted that, and the de facto results team when it was just Ron and me.
It was just you two going
times
through
have
the
changed.
results and making sure that they were okay.
Yeah, that was going through the results and uploading them, which is a lot more streamlined now than it used to be. Back then, we did everything.
Uh-oh. Where did Bob go? Uh-oh. Okay. We'll be right back, guys. We're going to go figure out what happened to Bob. Hello, everybody. We're back. We have found Bob Burton again. Not quite sure what happened there, but we're glad to have him back. Bob, we were just talking about being the original results team member, or de facto.
Yeah, well, so Ron was doing everything by himself in the beginning until I think like 2007, 2008. And then I joined him. He taught me online how to upload results. And back then we were doing everything manually in Excel. So it was not the nice streamlined way we have now, even with CubeComps, where it's just press a button and it generates your spreadsheet. You had to actually enter everything in Excel, decimal points and all. So the data entry was a nightmare. And then getting everything onto the website was a pretty extensive process. A clean competition only took about 10 to 15 minutes, and most of them were not clean. So luckily, we only had like 7-8 competitions a weekend back then. Yeah. Nowadays, if we had to do it this way, it would be an absolute nightmare with sometimes 25, 30 competitions in a weekend.
Oh, yeah.
It's gotten a lot easier.
I'm aware it is. As a delegate, uploading results is fairly simple and straightforward for us nowadays. So
yeah, we have it easy now.
I enjoy being a delegate in this area than the past era. So thanks, Bob, for your work all those years ago. But another thing that we're interested about is, what's it like being a WCA board member? Like, what exactly does the board do?
It's busy. So lot of emails, a lot of meetings, but basically we supervise the WCA, and so managing the senior delegates and the leaders for the committees and teams. So the senior delegates will nominate delegates, for example, and then we have to approve that. So they'll say, "Oh, this person should be a delegate," and they'll tell us why, and then we'll review the application and determine, yes, we agree, or no, we don't think they're ready. For selecting committee leaders, usually we have the interview process that follows the applications. Selecting major championships, which we just did a couple weeks ago. That was a fun process with lots of meetings. Supervising just day-to-day activities. There's always something that pops up. A lot of people, when they have a question, will email the board instead of emailing perhaps the communication team or the relevant people involved. And so sometimes it's forwarding emails to the places they belong.
What are these meetings like? I know that we have 4 board members, and they're all from different parts of the world. How do you guys coordinate meetings, and does anyone sort of get stuck with an awkward time zone?
Yeah, so I'm in New Jersey in the United States, and then we have Henrik and Chris over in Europe, and we have Ethan over in Australia. And so we're in 4 different time zones, and it's awkward for Ethan because the only times that really work for everybody are really, really early in the morning for Ethan, or sometimes really late in his evening. But he usually gets stuck with the bad times. And so usually it'll be like 5 o'clock in the morning for him, which will be midday for me, and then late evening for the Europeans. So he's young, though. He can handle it.
5 a.m. Man, that's some serious dedication. How much?
Yeah, but it's been we meet over Google Meet, and so we were prepared for all this remote stuff because we've been remote anyway. You can't work in person when you're spread out that far anyway. So
yeah. So the transition hasn't been that bad. But how
No.
much time do you guys spend on a normal week doing WCA related supervision?
It's hard to say because it fluctuates a lot. On an easy week, it might be 5 to 10 hours. On a difficult week, it might be 15 to 20. But probably between 10 to 15 hours on a given week is the estimate for how much work we do.
And you mentioned just a couple minutes ago the selection of the championships for the next 2 years for I guess, the Northern Hemisphere. What was that process like? How were those types of meetings? And how did you ultimately come to the conclusions of we're choosing this place, we're not going to seek out more nominations, for example?
Yeah, so we actually met with all of the teams that we received applications from. Some of the decisions were quite easy because it was either yes or no instead of this location or that location. And so that wasn't as bad as last year when we had numerous applications for most of the different regions. But we did meet with each of the teams, and again, we had to coordinate with the time zones, this time not only of ourselves, but sometimes also of other people in other countries. And so, there was one in Kazakhstan, which is a different time zone than the other 4 that we're used to, and then the other one in Russia was also the time that worked for us didn't work for everybody. And so usually for those types of meetings, we prefer as many of the board members to attend, but sometimes, the times just work out that not everybody's able to attend, and we'll take minutes so that if any board members who couldn't make it have any questions, then we'll let them review the minutes, and we'll email any questions that they have. The applications, they're public online. You can see most of them were pretty extensive, a lot different than they used to be a few years ago. I think the Australian team really set the bar with the World's 19 application because it's very thorough, and a lot of org teams have been following suit by having very thorough applications, sometimes with a complete plan in place for the schedule and qualifying times and seating arrangements. And, the more they've already planned, the more confident we can be that they'll be able to run a successful competition.
What types of things do you look for in these applications to try and make sure that whatever team is applying is both the best team in cases where there are multiple applications, but also, there is some bar even for these, single application regions to have to meet? What types of things are you looking for in the application and the staff and sort of the general organization that you think would be sufficient to hold these types of large competitions at a satisfactory level?
One of the most important things actually is the finances, because competitions like this are huge, and they take a few $100,000 to run. And so sometimes we're looking to make sure that the budget is actually viable, that the registration fees make sense, but are not too low that they won't be able to recoup their costs, and not too high that they're going to have excess money that they don't need. So we also look at the prize pool, for example, and whether the registration fee will be a flat fee or per event. We look at the size of the venue to make sure that it's suitable for the number of competitors that they've requested, and that the competitor limit makes sense for the competition. Obviously, we like the World Championship to be a big competition. So we're looking for a space that can have at least 1,000 competitors. And then looking at the experience of the org team, most of the applications we had a very experienced team, and that makes us a lot more comfortable. A team that's already organized a few very large competitions, we have the confidence that they're going to be able to do it again. Mm-hmm. That's not to say that an inexperienced team can't be successful, but my advice for those teams would be to recruit somebody, maybe as an advisor or as another core team member, to have somebody that has the experience, because there's a lot that goes into running those big competitions that if you've never done it before, you don't want to be surprised by it.
How different are these applications and competitions in general from, let's go back down to 2003. I mean, obviously the order of magnitude is changed by at least one level, from the dozens of competitors to the multiple hundreds of competitors. But otherwise, how has this whole organization process changed since then, both within the WCA and then also specifically thinking about large championships?
Well, in 2003, that one is a bit unique because that one actually predates the WCA. So there was not a standard for deciding what would be official back then. It's just been sort of accepted that would be an official competition. But since then, when the WCA became a formal organization, then it became a lot easier to say, okay, these competitions are official because we have somebody there to recognize that this will be an official competition and that the times held here were done under appropriate standards of fairness. Mm-hmm. But the other world championships, even 2005, 2007, back then they seemed like huge competitions. But looking at competitions today, some competitions that are just held on a random weekend in a location are bigger than those competitions that were world championships back then. And so it's grown considerably. I remember the first few competitions I went to, I used to think like 100 was a huge competition. And when I held a competition that had like 40 or 50 people, I'm like, wow, this is pretty big. And I remember expecting the next one to be like that, and I had like 90 something people registered. It's like, okay, this is unexpected. We didn't even have competitor limits back then for most competitions. It's it would be unheard of today to have a competition, and there's no limit to how many people can sign up. It would just be ridiculous.
I think I was part of that large wave of competitors that sort of showed up probably 2012 to 2014 and really exponentially grew it to normal competitions that we'd expect here in Maryland nowadays are going to be reaching anywhere between 180 and 250 competitors. So just around 200 competitors based on the size of the room. Yep. It's I've definitely seen the growth, but
I miss the days where you could just decide, okay, I want to go to a competition today. Let me just show up.
Yeah, that's not possible anymore. I remember I went to a Texas competition, and registration for that filled up within something like 30 minutes. And if you weren't there ready to click the register button, you were not going to be able to attend. So that's definitely something that's been changing a lot.
I remember a few competitions that we held at Liberty Science Center, and registration filled up so fast that I was just sitting at the computer, and at the minute registration opened, I knew it, even if I wasn't looking at it, because my phone was just buzzing. I would get something like 80 to 100 registrations in the first minute. Sometimes it was, so with a competitor limit of only like 120, we would fill in just a few minutes.
I was actually worried that for the World Championship, for some, like not last year in 2019, that because it was relatively close to big cubing hubs, both Australia and China and the Philippines have tons of cubers, I was worried that because registration opened at 3 a.m. local time here in the East Coast, that by the time I woke up, normally it would be filled. So I set an alarm for 3 a.m, and I set an alarm for 2:55 in the morning so I could be up at my computer at 3 a.m. to register for the competition and go promptly straight back to sleep. It didn't fill, but
the big ones usually take a while to fill up, because it is a bit of a commitment to say, okay, I'm going to go to this competition that's potentially thousands of miles away. Not everybody's prepared to make that decision when registration opens, and there's also an expense factor there that they used to be free, most world championships, but it's hard to do that now. We're just too big. The sponsorships don't cover the entire cost anymore. But to be able to sign up, you also want to make sure that you're not going to say, okay, I'm going to waste $100 here for signing up, and then maybe I can't go later. So there's a bit of a risk in signing up if you're not sure you're going to go. And so I think that's part of the reason why they don't fill up immediately. But I understand the risk. I've thought the same a few times for some of these competitions.
I just couldn't miss it. I couldn't miss it. But speaking of other things that are changing, I wanted to sort of switch topics a little bit and ask you about something that the community has been talking about on and off for a while, but it's the idea of having a WCA events list change in some way. Either some people really like Kilominx and face-turning octahedron as events that the WCA should add. Other people are very adamant about removing events such as clock or the redundancy of 6x6 and 7x7, for example. What's your ideal events, a WCA events list look like? And could you tell us a little bit about why you want specific events in and why you would like others to be removed if you do?
So there's two ways to think about this. One is what we're stuck with now. And I think now that we have an events list, the threshold for adding or removing something is much higher because there's a bit of a history there. The other way to think about it is, if I were to start a WCA fresh, which events would I include? And I wouldn't include 6x6 or 7x7. I didn't think they should have been events at the time. I think the main reason why they were added was it was a new puzzle that people didn't even think was possible to build back then. And there was a lot of excitement when they were released. It was sort of like the first set of new mainstream puzzles that were released. And now that they're added, I don't see them going away either. I don't think that it's worth removing them. There's a lot of people who still have a lot of interest in them. There are some differences between those puzzles and the smaller cubes. And so I'm not looking to axe a bunch of events. But if I was starting the WCA fresh again, I probably would not include those. Clock is another one that I love. Clock. But I think the main reason why it was added as an event in the first place is the same reason why Magic was added as an event. It has Rubik's in the name. And so I don't see Clock going anywhere. I think it's still a unique puzzle. It is a puzzle. So it does still have that aspect. It's different than most of the other events that we have, but I still think it brings something unique that's valuable to the WCA.
So let's flip that and think about adding events then. A lot of people have been pushing. There's some people in the chat that are saying #FTO for WCA. There was a push for Kilominx probably 4-ish years ago that was relatively strong. And there are also other types of puzzles that are not represented within the WCA, such as cuboids or shape mods. And to an extent, shape shifting is moderately underrepresented. There's just the square one in there. What are your thoughts on adding a bunch of different types of events to the WCA to try and cover these different aspects of cubing that the WCA is currently missing in its events list?
This is actually something that the board is actively working to coordinate with the WRC, the Regulations Committee, to come up with a formal process for adding new events. Because before it was very wishy-washy where, in order to have an event added, you need to prove that there's an interest or prove that it adds something unique. But, that's very vague. And we're trying to come up with a way to actively measure whether something adds value. And so we're not completed with this yet, but we do have a plan in mind that we hope to move forward with over the next few months or so that there is an actual way to have an event added based on community interest and whether that puzzle adds something to the WCA that we don't have already.
Wow, that is actually the first that I've ever heard of that. So that is very exciting news. Do you have an idea of how many events the WCA is thinking about adding? I mean, are we talking just 2 or 3 things over the next couple of years, or should we expect a large influx to try and have good representation across all of Twisty Puzzles?
We're not quite that far yet. So right now we're just trying to work on the process so that there is a way to add new events. And then what those events are, I don't know yet. Or when they will be added, also, I don't know. So it's still up in the air as to what this will look like. But we are trying to take this into account. And we realize that adding an event has been a very difficult thing. And it is one of the most requested things we get to the WRC is, what can we add this event? Can we add that event? And if you look at the forums, the WCA forum as well, you'll see that most of the topics are about adding events, and then they have to be merged with one where it's already been requested that, can we add that event? And so I think that it's possible that we'll add events sometime in the near future. Okay. I don't know how soon, but, we would like to see a way that this is actually possible.
That's very exciting. So people should be looking out for that over the next, hopefully, couple of years. Another topic about things that the WCA, I'm certain, has been considering for a while is the idea of paying delegates and other WCA staff members for the work that they do. So for the viewers out there who don't know, the WCA is entirely volunteer driven. None of the people that are doing any of the hard work that they do, dedicating their time to the WCA, get paid. So this is a topic that I'd love to ask you about, especially as someone who is probably in a position to be one of the first people to get paid. But before we talk about that, I would just like to note that Twitch just solved their first cube, and they had an NPerm, and successfully were able to do the NPerm. So big shout out to the Twitch chat to
nice job
being able to do that. Let's go back to this topic. Sort of, what are your thoughts on this type of change?
So that is something I would like to see, that certain staff members there would be some paid positions available. I don't know how soon that will be viable, because it would add some expense to the WCA. Mm-hmm. Right now we're not in this great financial position where we have all kinds of money rolling in, especially with the lack of competitions right now. But I can see positions popping up within the next few years, I think, where there would be some paid positions. I think.
Okay, gotcha. We just got a note from production. We need to reset Twitch solves real quick. So we are going to be right back and continue this discussion with Bob. So hang tight, everyone. All right, everybody, we are back. Twitch solves should be good to go. So you guys feel free to, at any point, type your moves down in chat and get this thing moving around. We're still here with Bob Burton, WCA Executive Director, and we were previously talking to him about the idea of paying delegates and other WCA staff members. And you had mentioned that this was something that is probably not in the very near future for the WCA, but something you would like to see happen.
The WCA has a lot of staff members. There's probably about 300 staff members, including delegates, team members, and committee members. And so to get to a point where everybody would be paid would take a really long time and would be very expensive. So I don't know if that's ever going to be possible. But I can imagine something like a paid position popping up soon for like an executive director or something. But that would become a full-time position. I would not have the time to work full-time for a paid position for the WCA and then also have my day-to-day job. But I can imagine somebody overseeing the organization as a full-time paid position. Usually the executive director is the first paid position for a nonprofit organization. The other possibility would be we have an executive assistance team, which those are the members who support the board. And so there's been this push lately over the past couple of years that the board had way too much on their plate. There was way too much work to do. And so we recruited these executive assistants to sort of do some of the work that we want to happen that doesn't necessarily need to be done by a board member, so that the board could be reserved more for decision making instead of action.
So this is, you're talking about like doing email forwarding and making sure that things get put in the right place.
Right. And so, tracking, we use Trello to track our activities and our tasks. And so they track our tasks for us. They'll write emails for us when we need to open up an application for a world championship, for example, or for emailing the staff to let them know what we've done over the past month, or doing background checks on nominated delegates, things like that don't necessarily need to be done by a board member, but they can inform the board so that we can make decisions, or they can carry out the decisions that we make. And so that's been very helpful. They've been great for the past, I think it's been about a year and a half or so that we've had them now. But it's taken a lot of work off the board's plate, making the position on the board a lot more manageable.
And you think that they would also be relatively, high in the queue for a paid position within the WCA?
Yeah, the other position too, I'm thinking would be someone to lead the software team. I think that could be a paid position as well. The software has always been something that we need development on, and it's all volunteer, like you said. So it's a matter of when somebody has time to put something into place. And most of the people who can do that sort of thing have jobs doing software already, and so it's great if they have some free time and are willing to work on WCA projects, but it's not realistic to expect that we can get everything we want without having to ever pay for any of it. I think that we would be able to make a lot of advancements in our software if we had somebody in a paid position there. But again, all of these things take money. And so that money would come from competitors, and they would have to pass on the expenses to them. And so if we raise dues, for example, that would be one way to do it. But right now our dues are relatively inexpensive, and I would hate to see them skyrocket overnight to, huge fees just so that we can make these payments. And we haven't even gotten to the part where we wanted to pay delegates, right? And so if you're going to also pay delegates for their time, then that's also going to add to the fees of competitions. And so some places are, like France, for example, doesn't even have fees for most of the competitors. Newcomers and members of the French Association compete for free. And so this would be difficult there because they would have to change their structure in order to accommodate this. In some places, like in the United States, sometimes registration is already pretty expensive. So if I had to increase threefold, fivefold in order to also pay for these other things, I could see that having a negative effect on competitions. So there's still a lot of thinking to do about how to implement this and implement it correctly. So I don't see happening yet. But I do think it will eventually be something that we do have, is a few paid positions in the WCA. And which ones, I don't know yet. When, also don't know yet. But I do think it is a possibility.
One of the things that I wanted to ask about that is, in the future, the WCA, with cubing going more mainstream, What is your opinion on that? We've got a brand new Netflix documentary that's coming out. Cubing is now hitting Twitch at relatively high levels. I mean, we're getting hundreds of viewers right now, and we're expecting a lot of growth. Red Bull's been active in events for the last couple of years. What's your opinion on cubing going mainstream, and how do you see this affecting the WCA?
I think it's great. It's been nice to see these other projects happening, and it's becoming a lot more common that when you say, I speed cube, people know what that means. It used to be this foreign concept where people say, how do you even solve that thing? And, now if you could see documentaries where they're being solved in under 10 seconds or, 5 or 6 seconds, it's come a long way in terms of speed as well. But I think the live streams, they've increased a lot in quality over the past couple of years, and it's becoming a lot more common that major competitions are being live streamed. I do think that we will reach a point where all major competitions should be streamed, with high production value as well, not just a stream with a few people watching, but something that's going to catch a lot of attention. And I think that's great for speed cubing in general. The more interest we can get, the further we can advance it.
Do you have any idea of what online streaming might be, and these online competitions that are being held, how they might affect the WCA? Or another question there is, how does the WCA board view these types of online competitions?
I really like these competitions, and I think they've been a great way to keep everybody connected during the pandemic, because a lot of people were upset that competitions were canceled for a certain number of months. We didn't know how many at the time, and people were like, okay, I don't know when I'm going to get to compete again. And this sort of helps to fill that void. For some people, it's not the same, and one of the best parts of going to a competition in person is the experience of meeting new people, and this doesn't really offer that in the same way, but it does give a way for people to still connect using cubes. It reminds me a lot of the old Sunday contest, where every Sunday there was some solves, and you would have to do those solves, and everybody would post their times online. And this is a lot more formal than that, but I think there's a lot of connection there. It's very similar. It's a way for people to compete against each other and also against themselves. And I don't see them becoming official. I think there's just too much of a headache in trying to decide how that would look. If you tried to have somebody analyze all the solves, there's still just so many ways to cheat or be dishonest in it that it's very difficult to make those times official and also preserve the integrity of the database. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's one of the best things that the WCA has to offer is when you look at the times in the WCA database, you know that those times were achieved under fair conditions. And when you go to an online environment, it's just a lot harder to secure that same notion. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of WCA official competitions, this today marks the second competition that is being held since quarantine has really, and coronavirus has really sort of taken a hold of competitions and major events or major gatherings in general. Do you have any opinions about the way that these competitions are being held? I know that some people online, especially people in countries that are still being hit really hard with the virus, some of them might be very curious and skeptical about how these competitions are being run, especially without masks or other types of potentially disagreeable personal protective equipment. What effort by these delegates and then anyone otherwise involved in it have been taken to make sure that these competitions are safe? And as a board member, sort of what made you feel convinced that they were going to be safe and appropriate at this time?
So one of the hardest things we've had to do on the board was when we decided competitions are not safe to hold, right? And so when we decided that back in March, and we started out by first discouraging competitions that were planned from being held, and then we made the decision all competitions will be on hiatus. We tried to just keep on analyzing the numbers until we reached the point where we felt, okay, we're at a point where in some places it could be safe. And so that's when we lifted the never-ending cancellation and said, okay, you can now have a competition, but we created a safety plan to make sure that places that are going to have competitions are held to a higher set of standards than before, so that we can do everything we can to minimize the risk. There's, of course, always going to be some risk, but we tried to minimize it as much as possible. So there's actually a new set of regulations that went into effect today, these temporary regulations that they help clarify some things that we had in our processes before that will make it likely to transmit the virus. And now all competitions that are submitted have to be approved by the WCA board. So we asked delegates that are hosting a competition to submit, tell us how they're going to comply with the safety plan. Also submit a risk management plan so that we can analyze the situation in their country or their region, as well as their plan to make sure that appropriate measures are being put in place. Because some places are ready to hold a competition and many others are not. So we want to make sure that people aren't just trying to host a competition because they can, but that they're deciding to do so because it's relatively safe. And like I said, it's not going to be completely safe as long as this pandemic is still going on. There's always some risk there, but we want it to be as safe as possible. I don't want people to risk their lives to go to a speed cubing competition. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
And so a lot of countries are handling things differently. In some places, masks are an everyday thing. You go outside, you see everybody wearing a mask. And other places, you go outside and you see nobody wearing a mask. And so we realized that, and that's part of the reason why in our safety plan, some of the things that we said should happen are recommendations and not necessarily requirements, because we realized that not every region is handling this the same way. And so some things are mandated, like social distancing is mandated in the safety plan. And we're trying to minimize contact as much as we can. And when we review a competition, we're reviewing things like the schedule to make sure that there's enough time in there to host the event safely, and also have enough time to sanitize after each group, for example, or that the schedule doesn't have too many people competing in a short time, because that means that there's going to be a lot of people in one place at the same time. That increases risk. And so we're looking for schedules that are more spaced out, some schedules that are shorter and have lower competitor limits. So we're also looking at the size of the venues that are being proposed to make sure that if there is a competition being held, then it's not being held with a lot of people. Or if there are a lot of people, that there's enough space to handle that.
Well, it sounds like you guys are doing a really thorough job, sort of going above and beyond what is sort of required to have an event, and making sure that whoever is attending these types of competitions, as they start to slowly come back, are not going to be risking their lives for this kind of thing. And
that's what we're hoping.
As a delegate, we in our area have recently just moved a competition back an entire year. We just said, we could physically hold it. It is legal for us to hold it, but it wouldn't have had the same sort of spirit and sort of type of event that we wanted if we're all sitting in different corners and wearing masks, right, and scared out of our minds when solving. So yeah, it is. As someone on the ground, I understand, but I'm sure in your position, you also have to make sure you have to do this for every single competition, and there are multiple different factors across regions that are going to complicate the matters a lot.
Yeah, and it's difficult to evaluate a competition, and then sometimes we have to make the hard choice and say, no, this is not safe. And that happens sometimes. But Hopefully as things get better, it becomes more common that competitions can be held safely. But like you said, it's not worth the risk. So I'm glad for the delegates who have been making that decision, that in areas where it's not safe to do so, they've been deciding very maturely, we're not ready for this. And so let's push it back.
I wanted to switch topics to something a little bit lighter than this. And this is a viewer question from probably a DNF saying, what is one thing about the work the WCA does that you wish more people were aware of?
Oh, that is tough. There's so many facets to the WCA now, and if you look, there's like 12 different teams and committees that didn't necessarily exist years ago. But one thing is that the people who do work for the WCA do so with the community's interest in mind. And sometimes people will complain that this is not what I would have wanted. But the people who are making these decisions are putting in lots of work for the community's benefit, and that's the whole purpose of the WCA, is to serve the community. So I just hope that people will keep an open mind, that the decisions that are made, sometimes they're not easy, but they are for the community's best interest.
That is an answer that I think every delegate can very well resonate with. That there are tough decisions that are made, and but it's you're trying to make it as inclusive and as nice as you can possibly make it.
As far as I know, we don't have any staff members who are actively trying to sabotage the community.
That would be surprising to me as well. So I think that people are always trying to help, but they're what's best might be a little bit different in different people's minds. This is sort of the last topic that I want to cover, but it doesn't mean that we only have a minute or two left.
Sure.
But I'd love to get a lot of your thoughts out of this. This was asked by viewer Judy Davies. In the big picture, what do you think the future of cubing is, and what role do you see the WCA having within that more expanded or future role or future of cubing?
So this is a tough question, because I was actually thinking about this question a few days ago as well, because I was asked a similar question recently. And I was thinking about what cubing looked like 10, 15 years ago. It was much different. Obviously, it's a lot easier now to access with the internet and YouTube videos. I remember thinking back when I first learned to solve, there weren't a whole lot of resources. And then when I tried to get faster, there were still only a handful of resources available. Speedcubing.com being one of the main ones. It's like a main hub to learn how to get faster. And there were some algorithms there, and some of them were really horrible because they were optimized to move count instead of how you could finger trick things.
Ergonomics.
So it's amazing to see how much things have changed over the past 10, 15 years. And I just can't even imagine what things will look like with another 10 or 15 years, because we're still growing. Obviously 2020 will probably be the first year in a while that we have a reduction in both competitors and competitions. But prior to this, the WCA was growing at a rate of like 25 to 30% per year in terms of new competitors. And even in terms of new competitions, we were growing. Last year, I think there were over 100 countries that had competitions. And so it's not like it was in the 80s where it was a fad and it was around for a couple of years and then went away. When it came back in the early 2000s, it just started growing and has not stopped. And I don't see anything that will happen to stop it. I think if anything was going to happen, it might have been that the pandemic would slow things down, but people found a way to keep the interest there through, like, cubing at home, for example, is a way that's keeping people involved, or discussion on forums and now that competitions are starting to happen back up in live, I think that's going to generate some more interest. And you have the Netflix documentary, and there's just so many different ways that it's expanding that I think it's just going to continue to grow. And so I think that it is going to continue to gain popularity. And I think that the WCA will play a part in helping that growth, especially now that we are a nonprofit organization. I think that the mission of the WCA might expand over time to include more areas, and to maybe even collaborate with other projects, like through the Red Bull competitions, for example, which are also happening remotely, or even collaborations with Rubik's.
It's very exciting. One of the specific types of events that has been discussed both on the WCA forums and sort of elsewhere along the internet is the idea of a cubing convention. Instead of a U.S. Nationals, you have the U.S. CubeCon, and it contains a U.S. Nationals within it. But in addition, it's a longer event. There are seminars. This is the place where people release their newest documentaries or cubing films. There are vending spots. There are places where people can hang out. What are your thoughts on that type of event? And do you think it is a likely reality in the future?
I really do think it is. We've had some discussion about this when I was on the Cubing USA board, where we were thinking about how to roll out a sort of Cubing Con convention. Like, it would still have a competition to it, but it would not be the only thing there. And at Nationals, we try to squeeze in a lot of those things, but it's, they feel squeezed in. It's the staff is overworked because it's just a lot of work to coordinate everything when you have a 4-day competition and then try to throw seminars on top of it. And usually this stuff just gets thrown at the end of the day, when the organizers are all exhausted, and we can find one or two that are willing to coordinate, something after dinner. And that's when we have the unofficial competitions. And I can imagine having these large convention type activities, with less emphasis on the nationals competition part and more on the other aspects. If you look at Dutch Cube Day, for example, I had the pleasure of going to Dutch Cube Day back in 2005, and downstairs there was a competition. But upstairs, there was like this whole other world going on with puzzle makers and retailers and people doing puzzle mods, and there's more to the community than just speed solving. There's a lot of different aspects to it. And it sort of had that feel that you can leave the competition and go to another area. And some of the big competitions now are also, you'll see it especially in European competitions like Euros and World Championship 2017 and 2019 had like a fun zone where there's more activities to do other than just cubing. And I think there's plenty of cubing stuff to do. But I think having those other aspects adds value to the competition. I could see competitions that are more or less just devoted in that way, where there's, maybe the speed solving competition is just a small part of the convention, not the main focus.
Well, Bob, this has been an awesome talk. I think that people have learned a lot, both about what the WCA does and also sort of what it finds important, both nowadays and sort of for growth for the future, as well as a little bit of a blast from the past about what it was like back in the early days in 2003 and such.
Wild West.
We've been really excited to have you on, Bob. Thank you so much for taking your time, and I know you're very busy with 2 kids. To spend some time with us and chat about where the WCA is right now and where it's planning to go.
Well, thanks for having me.
We're really happy to have you on. Bob Burton is the World Cube Association Executive Director, a member of the WCA board, and has been active for longer than most of the viewers have been alive. So we've been really happy to have Bob on. And we are going to be coming on with cubing at home right after this. We'll be right back.